In progress.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I can hear you just fine.
Great.
Nice looking background.
Yes, you do have a nice looking background.
I think yours is pretty good too. You got the bear, you got the books in back. And
What bear?
the painting behind you. Over the mantle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, here's Helen.
Yeah, although she
Danita can't jump. She's not feeling well. It's too bad. Hey, Helen.
hi. Ah. Ugh. Ugh.
We're here.
Penny,
Hello. Everybody have a nice President's Day?
We forgot it was a holiday.
I remembered when they didn't pick up the trash.
Yeah, I went to get the mail. That's right. There's no mail today. Okay, the dog has to make her appearance. Here's the dog. Okay,
Dog.
go lie down.
Not the same without her. So how's the latest? What's the latest on your daughter's move back east?
Nothing new. They're looking for jobs on this coast. So I think that's going to be the thing that will set the timetable. They're telling me this summer, but we'll see.
Well, summer is a good time to be in Connecticut.
Yeah, they moved in August 2 years ago, so that'll be the 3-year anniversary, I guess.
How many children do you have, Helen?
2,
You have a son, Scott,
yes, and my daughter is Tanya.
Tanya,
Mhm.
local?
Yeah, she's in New London.
We're just trying to keep our kids within the USA to begin with. Maybe on this coast would be nice.
Well, you've gotten to see some things you wouldn't have gotten to see.
Oh, that's
otherwise.
true. I would never have gone to Central America. Emily weren't living there. Panama is a wonderful country. I can recommend it. I'll be taking off Thursday to Florida, so I will miss the next class. Ray has decided he doesn't want to go. I'm doing my family thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Your sister's down there, right?
Yeah, to my sister, her youngest son has a successful second marriage and a successful child at the age of 40. So this is a big deal.
Where
So,
in Florida?
just south of
Dallas.
Tampa. Oh, well, first Dallas to see the nephew, and then just south of Tampa in Ellington.
Yeah, my brother lives around there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, actually, if you get a chance, where you need to go see the Dolly Museum.
Yes, Jennifer keeps telling me about that. It's apparently down the street from her.
Yeah,
Salvador
it's really
Dali.
cool.
Yeah, he's one of the stranger artists. You
Yes,
might-
He has things. He actually did, before he died, he cooperated with Alice Cooper on some exhibits.
Oh, well, that would be even more.
Yeah. It's a virtual reality thing. Hi,
Oh,
Dan.
gee. Okay.
The other thing is the Ringling Museum.
Yeah, that she said has closed up. Maybe
Oh,
it's
is
just seasonal. We're actually we got tickets to go kayaking with the manatees.
Okay.
So we're gonna go see the sea cows.
well, you
And then
won't,
go ahead.
you won't have to get anybody to take care of the dog if Ray stays home.
That's true.
I'm the dog sitter.
He's the dog sitter.
I was gonna be the plant sitter, but we haven't planted yet. So.
Yeah, I keep
Actually,
telling him, don't start things yet.
I have
Speaking
my,
of plants, there's a garden down there you probably would enjoy. Where is it? But it's in Bradenton, right, Mayor?
yeah, it's on a peninsula, so it's out in the, yeah. I don't remember the name. It was a nice botanical garden to walk.
We did go to
Really,
some,
actually, if you like orchids, it's the place to go.
oh, we went to some estate, because we've been down there before, that had outdoor, they were all outdoor gardens. It was a nice walk around. I'm just looking for a little warmth, although today, geez, it was like 50 something, so it was springtime. Of course, it's
How are you,
not gonna-
Diane?
I'm tired. I've been sheetrocking.
Oh, For
Where?
yourself?
The boys hung the rock and they hate taping, so I do the taping, and then I hate painting even more, but I do the painting.
Is this your house or theirs?
No, down in my basement, the furnace room was unfinished, and so I decided I wanted sheetrock. We're getting there, little at a time.
Yeah, we've been redoing our kitchen, and so today we did the trim boards, which was nothing but tedious.
Oh, yes. Almost as fun as painting.
Yeah.
Ray will have it all finished by the time you get home.
Before she leaves.
Yeah, I wanted it all done before I left, so, and we're down to like the last few things, but you know, everything takes longer and we don't do it right the first time, so it takes like 3 tries to get it right. I now know why people take their kitchens down to the studs. It's easier to just rip it all out and start again, rather than we're trying to fit trim boards in, you know, patching them in. And you have to get them exactly right. Or don't fit.
Yeah, Mary, we did that in our kitchen. Mary put some new trim boards in a spot where there weren't before, and she can do that.
I think it took 3 days to do a baseboard.
Yeah, yeah, we've got them in, but I'm not happy with them. I want to redo them, and Ray's like, oh, it's fine. And I'm like, we're discussing it.
Penny wins.
If I'm willing to take it out and do it again, then I win.
Oh, let's see. Now, David just called, and his daughter and grandson are visiting him in Rochester, so he's
Oh,
not gonna
right,
join us.
right.
And Danita is not feeling well, so she won't be
Oh.
with us.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Beautiful
Let's see.
day. Did everybody get outside?
Yeah.
Good.
How are you doing, Carol?
I'm doing well. Had a good day. I walked with Rudy early this morning when it was still warm. I understand tonight it's pretty cold out there. Is that correct?
It's
I
back
don't
in
know.
the 30s. It's back in the
Pretty
30s.
cold out there now?
Oh, I'm gonna say I just opened up the door for Barkley. I'm gonna say maybe it's 45 degrees out there. It feels like it's much colder because today was so warm. It was almost
Uh-huh.
50 at 1:30, 2 o'clock. Mm,
About 41 degrees here.
all right.
I keep
Let's see.
disappearing and coming back. Okay.
How did the in-person service work out at St. Luke?
Great. It's good.
What are they doing at St. Luke?
They had in-person, they started up in-person services again
Oh,
yesterday.
yes, oh, yes. Much
Yeah,
better.
you were there.
I've not heard that term before. What is it all about?
What, in-person?
Yeah.
Oh,
you
as
mean
opposed,
back to church.
they were doing Zoom services for about a
Oh.
month because of the COVID, the
Okay.
Omicron. So
All right,
now they're back in.
understand. Right.
Yeah, Carol, the flowers, the sunflowers on the altar were for Emily and Deanna's birthdays.
Oh, wonderful.
I-
I love sunflowers and I noticed them for sure.
Yeah, Pam picked them out and perfect. It's very nice. I took pictures. Unfortunately, the girls can't see them, but they got pictures of them.
Wonderful.
Well, they were both born at the same time?
No, they're a month apart. One's February, one's the middle of February, the other one's early March. So this was right between
That's close.
Mhm.
How far apart are they in years?
7 years apart.
So you had one out of diapers before the other one came along.
That's, yes. Out of diapers and in second grade, able to take care of herself was the plan, but not really.
That was Mary's plan too.
Did it work, Mary?
Well, I planned to have them 2 years apart. The first one was born on February 11th. 2 years later, I had somebody born on February 7th.
Oh.
Good at timing.
Yeah.
And number 3?
Well, he just came in July.
Oh, okay. Good enough.
He comes in his own good time.
Mhm.
So tonight we're going to talk about God. And then next week we'll start doing some history stuff with Joshua. So if you're following along in the notes, this is the second part of the notes for the Cohen course. It starts on page 3 of 41. And it's really going to be about different ideas about who is God? Who is this God?
Mhm.
Good.
What is God like? So just kind of hanging out here just in case we might get Jane. Does anybody have any questions before we start? Okay. So just a reminder that on March 1st, which is a Tuesday, there is a Shrove Tuesday pancake wingding at St. Mark. Right, Mayor?
That's right. And you're supposed to bring your dried palm so we can burn them to make ash for ash.
And then there are 2 Ash Wednesday services at St. Luke on Ash Wednesday, which is the next day. And I think they're planning, so I know that there are going to be interdenominational services in Norwich. I don't know exactly what's being planned at St. Luke.
There's gonna have Wednesday services, but they're gonna be really short. 6:15 to 7 o'clock. I think if I can remember the name of the service that we've done it before.
Holden,
Golden service?
Yes, that's it. Yep, you got it.
Mhm. I love that.
Yeah.
everybody likes it.
It's a long
heard in
ways to go for 45 minutes, though. I don't. We'll
Yeah,
have-
Maybe there's other things. I'm not sure. It was surprise, surprise to find out what it is.
I heard an interview with Marty Hagan, the guy that wrote it, and he actually developed it at Holden Community, which is a retreat center out the west. And he published it because it was the one they complained about the least.
Oh, oh, beautiful.
That was his words. So, okay, I think we will get started with Mr. Cohen. So I'm going to mute people. And share the screen. Share the sound.
We've now finished working our way through the Torah, right? We read large chunks of Genesis, large chunks of Exodus, and scattered bits and pieces from Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We've spoken about the various sources, the narratives, the laws. We've more or less, I think, done due diligence on the Torah. We haven't read the whole thing, but we've gotten a good sense of the whole thing, I hope, if you've done the readings. So today is the last session in which we're going to reflect on the Torah. And starting on Monday, we'll be looking at the book of Joshua and moving ahead. So today's theme is God, a theme which is everywhere and in all the sessions we've been looking at, and yet we haven't actually sat down and just reflected on what the Torah says about God or how it presents God as a character in the story. That's what we're doing today. So to begin, who is Israel's God? Well, of course, you know from the modern Bible scholars, we make a distinction between, we pay a lot of attention to the different names of God that are used. So the first name that we find in Genesis chapter 1, in fact, the third word of the Torah, is God, and the Hebrew word is Elohim. Elohim is a plural form. If you know Hebrew, then Elohim looks like a plural noun. It's a plural noun, but it is a singular noun. That is to say, it governs singular verbs. It gets singular adjectives. So it's grammatically singular, even though the form of the word looks like it's plural. That word we translate God. In your Bible translations, in the beginning God created, or when, comma, God began, da, da, da. Right, so God is our standard translation for Elohim. It seems to be a plural of Eloah, which would seem to be the singular form, which appears sometimes in the Hebrew Bible, usually in poetical form, in poetical context. And in turn, it seems to be a variant on the form El, on the name El, E-L, which is found all over the place in the ancient Near East as a name for a god or a name for a specific god. So that is El, or that is Elohim. Elohim sometimes is used in the plural, both in the Torah and elsewhere. And when it is, it does get plural adjectives or plural verb. And usually when it does that, we translate it gods. Small case G, O, D, S. Some of these are tricky, trying to figure out what exactly the passage means, but there are these passages where Elohim is plural and means gods, most famously in the Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Elohim acherim al panai. So there, clearly it means gods, right? Can't mean anything else. Some other passages we can argue whether it means gods or it means God. By the way, our convention that when we're talking about God, we have a capital G, and we're talking about other gods, we put a lowercase g. So Zeus and Apollo and Marduk and Ra all get lowercase g God because we don't believe in those gods, whereas the Judeo-Christian God, if I may use that term, gets an Islamic God, right, gets a capital G God. I don't know the whole history of that convention. Anybody know the history of that convention? That, of course, is not ancient, because ancients do not have capital letters. Hebrew does not have capital letters to this very day. Okay? And most ancient Greek manuscripts don't have capital letters either. So, what? Well, they have only capital letters. Thank you. Some of them are only capital letters. Some of them are only minor lowercase letters. Okay? So anybody know? I'm just curious, just an idea popped into my head. Where and when does this convention come from? Don't know, but it's not ancient. Okay, right, so that's the problem. So God or gods, it's the same word, looks the same, you can't tell, and you have to figure out from context what you're talking about. Okay. Last point there, when the Bible is trying to talk about God in a generic, universal sense, it usually uses Elohim. In other words, all the nations of the world can worship Elohim. Elohim can demand justice from all the nations of the world. Elohim sets up a moral code, a universal moral code for everyone, and everyone is expected to follow that universal moral code. You see that all over the place in wisdom literature. Remember wisdom literature? I gave you a brief introduction to it when we talk about Deuteronomy, but we're going to have a session coming up on it in a few weeks. So just hold on to this. So wisdom literature is literature in the Hebrew Bible, most famously the book of Proverbs, the book of Job, and the book of Ecclesiastes. These are examples of wisdom literature. They almost always and only use the name Elohim. And I would translate in these books, the deity. And it's not Israelite, it's just God in the abstract, in the absolute sense. So that I mean that too. So I count up at least 3 different meanings, translations of the word Elohim. Elohim means God of Israel. Elohim means deity, the deity, leaving out its Israelite aspect. Or 3, Elohim can mean gods. In our convention, we would say lowercase g. Okay. Then we turn, that's chapter 1. That's the priestly account of the creation, you recall. Genesis chapter 1, modern Bible scholars think it's P. So P is using Elohim as the name for God. But you get to chapter 2, all of a sudden you see something new in Genesis. You see the second creation account uses the particular name of God, YHWH, and I'll talk about that in 1 second, sometimes by itself or in combination with Yahweh, YHWH plus Elohim mixed together. YHWH is the name called the Tetragrammaton because it's tetra, 4 grammaton letters. So the name, divine name of 4 letters. And the YHWH is usually translated Lord. Why is it translated Lord? It's translated Lord because ancient Jews, ancient Israelites, and following them, ancient Jews, and following them, medieval and modern Jews, right, don't want to say the name YHWH. Why? Because that is bearing the name of God in vain. We are afraid of desecration. Frankly, I think the real issue is magic and superstition, right? You know, this name will zap, is electric. This name will zap you if you say it just right or if you say it just wrong. So you're better off not saying it. Right. So the result was already in ancient times already, when Jews saw the name YHWH, these are I'm anglicizing the Hebrew letters, of course, YHWH. When they saw that, they didn't pronounce it. They said instead the Hebrew word Adonai, which means Lord. And then when the Greek translators got to the Hebrew Bible, they saw YHWH and they translated it also as Lord, but the word they used was kurios, which is the Greek word for Lord or Master, right? And that is why Jesus Christ is always known as Lord. Well, actually, there's several more steps in that logic. But, okay, many Christian prayers notably say Kyrie eleison, those of you who are Christians, those of you who listen to Mozart and requiems online and so on. So Kyrie eleison, Kyrie means is the vocative for Lord. In other words, we're addressing the Lord, Kyrie, Lord. Eleison, have pity, have mercy. So we get from YHWH to Adonai, to Lord, or to Kurios, and then to Lord. And then for Christians, Kurios is the special title for Christ. Letters. You also find in many Qumran scrolls of the Torah that they're writing the scroll in regular Hebrew script, but when they get to the name YHWH, they use the old script. Our unfamiliar Hebrew script. In other words, this name is powerful and potent, and when you get to it, it's danger. Flashing red lights. Be careful. So a 19th century German scholar, right, asked himself, well, what's the real pronunciation of this mysterious YHWH? Right? He came up with the transliteration of, I'm going to say it now, Yahweh, which either is or is not the correct pronunciation of that name, because we don't know the correct pronunciation of that name. That's, if it follows certain grammatical rules, then that's what the pronunciation would have been. And it would have meant then he who brings into being, or he is the source of being, or the how do you say, being an intransitive verb. He that makes things come into being. But as I said, from a very ancient times, no one pronounced the name, so consequently it's conjectural how to pronounce it. The pronunciation Jehovah, as you know, is completely in error. I know for sure it was not pronounced Jehovah. This I'm absolutely sure. However it was pronounced, I'm not sure. But this I do know. It was not pronounced Jehovah, because Jehovah represents a combination of an X and a Y. Combining the letters YHWH, the V is the same as the W, the V and the W, and the J is the same as the Y. So the consonant, the letters YHWH, but taking the vowels of the word Elohim and attaching them to the name of God, YHWH, and then you wind up with Jehovah. So I'm not objecting to Jehovah's Witnesses, that's fine. They're beautiful, wonderful people, I have no problem, but I'm simply commenting as a philologist and a historian, Jehovah is not the original pronunciation of the name. Okay, let's get to the heart of the matter. YHWH, as far as we know, seems to be the quintessentially Israelite name of God. Elohim shares all those connections with the ancient Near East, as I mentioned, but YHWH seems to be Israelite. Now, we're going to get to in just a minute or two where this God comes from, but as far as we have it, YHWH is found in Israelite literature, the Hebrew Bible, Israelite contexts, and in archaeologically speaking, also either in or immediately adjacent to the settlements of the ancient Israelites. So this seems to be an Israelite name of God. Whether the name and the God come from somewhere else, I'll come back to very shortly. We have some other names that I'm not going to talk about. El, I mentioned already. El Shaddai is another name that appears a couple of times. El Elyon, the highest God, I guess we translate El Elyon, or supreme God, something like that, would be El Elyon. Then a whole bunch of phrases like God of the fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of your fathers, God of my fathers, right? A whole series of phrases such as these. So what do we do with all this? If you are a traditionalist, by that I mean a Jew or a Christian, then for you, all these interesting names, Elohim, YHWH, YHWH-Elohim, El Shaddai, all these names, they're all one and the same thing, if you are a traditionalist. It means God, capital G. Why then does God walk around with a wallet full of credit cards with different names on it? Because I know, because if you are a traditionalist, the different name of God reflects different aspects of God. So one's the merciful aspect, one's the judicial aspect, or the stern aspect. One is the aspect of God as a God of nature. You can make up all kinds of things, right? And they did. So depending upon the aspect of God that is at play in any given verse, that's the name that would be used. And in some passages, we have to admit, this exegesis works very well. Some passages. If you are a modern Bible scholar, then when you see different names for the same thing, you know right away there is a suture. There's stitching at work. Somebody is trying to combine various things and pretend they're all the same, but we modern Bible scholars know better. These were once different gods. These come from different places, different schools, north, south, east, west. This was not originally Israelite. It's Israelite. It's been assimilated into Israel. You can make up all kinds of things, right? Or the most obvious one we've already discussed several times here, different sources. One strand in the Bible likes this name of God, the other strand likes that name of God, until at some point some mysterious redactor came and stitched them together. But the seam is still apparent for all to see in these different names. So, according to modern Bible scholars, YHWH arrives in ancient Israel at a certain point, and from that point onward, YHWH becomes an ancient Israelite god. But YHWH was not always the Israelite god, because you have these other names and other ways of describing that god. So where and when, according to modern Bible scholars, I repeat, not, needless to say, traditionalists, so according to modern Bible scholars, where, when, how, and whence does YHWH arrive on the scene? So first of all, the first piece of evidence modern Bible scholars point to for the newness of YHWH, evidence that YHWH was not there one day and is there the next day, are two key passages in the book of Exodus. And I transcribed the text for you on your handout. These are readings that are part of the assignment in the syllabus. Exodus chapter 3. This is Moses at the burning bush. Moses is now being commissioned by God, just as the many prophets get commissioning scenes. We have that. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah have commissioning scenes. Here Moses is being commissioned as chief. He's going to be the chief man, the main man, to get the Israelites out of Egypt. That's what's going on. So Moses says to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Very odd passage. And then it continues. And God said to Moses, trying to sound mysterious, right? Or in the movie, The Ten Commandments, I am that I am. Right, you need a proper kind of voice with special effects, right, to kind of capture it. He continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, sent me to you. And God said further, thus shall you speak to the Israelites, the Lord, YHWH, God of your fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. If you are a modern Bible scholar, you look at this passage and you say, I see a seam right in front of me. It's very clear that somebody is trying to combine this notion of YHWH, here given the etymology of which seems to be a different form of the same verb from that same root, meaning I shall be. I am the existing one. Sherayeh, I am that I am, or something like that. And not referring to a casual fall. That's a different story. Right. You don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, never mind. So I am that I am. So it seems that the narrator is trying to explain to you what this name YHWH is. And here's a moment where Moses now gets the truth, to understand that that God is the same as the God of the fathers from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the two are now being blended into one. A similar kind of idea you find in Exodus chapter 6, where Moses' work is already underway to try to get the Israelites out of Egypt. God spoke to Moses and said, I am the Lord, YHWH. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, YHWH. Here then, one of our biblical sources apparently thinks that in the book of Genesis you won't find YHWH, you'll only find El or El Shaddai. But is now telling you that henceforth I'm going to use the name YHWH. Our book of Genesis is chock full of references to YHWH. Answer, if you're a modern Bible scholar, different source. Simple. So P and E use Elohim in the book of Genesis, but J uses YHWH. So J did not write this verse in the book of Exodus. That's how modern Bible scholars think. Now, if you are a traditionalist, what do you say? Did traditionalists, Jews and Christians, notice that there are different names of God in the text? They certainly noticed it. Did they notice that these verses seem to be very challenging? Yep, they noticed. Modern Bible scholars haven't found anything which was not known long since to traditionalists. The question is, how do you read it? And how do you understand the implications of it? For modern Bible scholars, this is clear evidence of seams, where one source doesn't quite agree with another on how to present the portrait of Israel's God. For traditionalists, no, we go back to the point of the Lord says, I did not make my character, YHWH, manifest to them, because I had not yet redeemed them. I had not yet fulfilled my promise. Insofar as the Lord fulfills the promise, that's the aspect represented by the name YHWH. And that they had not yet seen. Because now I'm about to show it to you and to them by bringing you out of Egypt. All right, that either is or is not a satisfactory interpretation, but that's how traditionalists would explain this verse. But for modern Bible scholars, it's a clear evidence that the ancient Israelites themselves have some dim memory that once upon a time, God was not YHWH. There is, in fact, a marriage going on at a certain moment. YHWH is then identified with the God of the fathers. So, if this be true, then I ask my question again. Whence does this God come? Or, who is this God? So if you're a modern Bible scholar, at least as discussed by Kugel, YHWH is a warrior god who comes to Israel from the deserts of the south. Probably Midian, one of the neighboring tribes. And evidence for this comes from various poetical passages in the Bible, where the Bible seems to say, flat out, that God is arriving from Midian, or God is arriving from the south. And I gave you two of the main pieces of evidence on your handout, on lecture notes. So Deuteronomy 33:2. The Lord came from Sinai. He shone upon them from Seir. Seir is another name for Edom, which is another tribe in the south, in the desert regions. He appeared from Mount Paran and approached from Riverboat Kodesh, wherever that is. I can't tell you where that one is. Lightning flashing at them from his right hand. Footnote, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Lamo, no idea what to do with that. But here we seem to have a description of Sinai experience. Remember all the lightning and thunder and the flash, the light and sound show, right, at Mount Sinai? So here we are said that God arrives, as it were, on here from Sinai, from Seir, from Mount Paran, out in those desert regions. That's where Mount Sinai is, or Chorev. It's out in the southern desert. Well, that's where the God apparently used to hang out until God came from there to Israel. One verse. The other verse is from Habakkuk. Habakkuk. What is Habakkuk? Habakkuk is one of those mysterious and much neglected minor prophets in the scroll called the 12 prophets, the 12 minor prophets. Minor not qualitatively, heaven forbid. Minor simply in quantity. They're short. So you can get 12 of them onto one scroll. Isaiah takes up a whole scroll by himself. But here you get 12 into one scroll. So they're called the 12 minor prophets, and Habakkuk is one of them. So he has a description of a divine epiphany in chapter 3. Epiphany, God is making manifest. God is displaying his power and his presence in chapter 3. This is another extremely difficult passage from the point of view of translation. I'm sure Hebrew Bible PhD students would not want to get this passage on an exam, right? But here it is. God is coming from Teman. Eloah mi Teman yavo. The holy, there it says God. It's Eloah. The Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah, whatever Selah means, we don't know. His majesty covers the sky, splendor fills the earth, a brilliant light, blah, blah, blah. Glory, blah, blah, pestilence, plague, blah, blah, blah. It makes the earth shake, blah, nations tremble, blah, blah, blah. They're saying low. Tents of scene of havoc, tents of Cushan, land of Midian. He's from Teman. Teman, at least the modern Hebrew, means Yemen. But Teman just means the south. So here again is description. Apparently this God is this mighty warrior God full of sound and light, sound and fury, right? Coming from the deserts of the south to Israel where he now abides. So if you're a modern Bible scholar, you put it all together. We recognize that the Hebrew Bible itself preserves evidence of a memory that this God was once not our God, or wasn't called this. It was called something else until YHWH arrives from the deserts of the south. Enters and then is blended with, becomes identified with our traditional names of God. El, God of the fathers, and so on. Okay, I'm not sure whether anything I just said is correct. I'm sure it's correct in the sense that I believe I've accurately presented the discussion in Kugel with some elaborations on how modern Bible scholars put things together. Do we know this for certain that this is true? Is this for certain historical? What's the answer, class? No, you should have figured this out by now. This is one of the themes in this class, right? These are all conjectures, hypotheses, possibilities. But smoking guns we don't got. Or in this case, smoking mountains, right? We don't have. So again, we're stuck with how you interpret these ambiguous passages. And then you've got the specific passages here about God coming from the south. I'd point out these are all from biblical poetry. And I had the same problem with these that I have. Remember those passages we looked at about God destroying the sea monster or Rahab in creation? Yeah, that's what it says. So can I deduce from that there was once upon a time Israelite theology about God and the monsters, which is then suppressed by the version we have in Genesis chapter 1? Answer, maybe. Other answer? It's poetry. Give me a break. They're not passing this off as a piece of theology. It's not a theological tract. It's poetry. Who takes poetry literally? Answer, modern Bible scholars. Okay, but back. Right. Who takes poetry literally? We don't take poetry literally. Why all of a sudden are we taking this so literally? I don't understand it. So it's a poet using imagery. Yeah, sure, imagery. Yeah. Okay. I have no problem with that. It's imagery. Let's think about that. And then I would point out, too, that we also have other poems in the Bible which associate God not with the south and the desert, but with the north. And the clearest example of that is not discussed in Kugel, don't know why, is Psalm 29. Where Psalm 29 uses imagery which clearly locates YHWH, not in the south in the desert, but in the north, in Lebanon, where the cedars are. Remember cedars of Lebanon? Right, the Lebanese national flag to this very day has cedar on it. Right, famous for its mighty and wonderful cedar trees. So here is Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, you divine beings, literally sons of gods, if that's the right translation. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength, blah, 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 majestic, holy, blah, 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 over the waters, glory thunders, right? The Lord is power, the Lord is majesty, the Lord, blah, blah, blah. He makes Lebanon, blah, blah. He shatters the cedars of Lebanon. And all modern Bible scholars notice that Psalm 29 seems to be chock full of imagery and language and metaphors that come straight out of Ugaritic poetry, which is poetry from the Semitic language a couple kilometers up the road. So do I deduce, therefore, that YHWH came from Lebanon into Israel? I would say, of course not. The poet is singing the might of the power of God using imagery derived from northern poems, just as he's able to sing of the might of God from imagery from southern poems. I'm not advancing a thesis class. I'm simply showing you how tentative all of this is. What is this God like, and how does God relate to the world? And now I'm going to talk about God simply as the generic word to refer to the image of God as we see especially in the Torah. So here we need to talk about the God of the philosophers. We're going to first discuss what this God is not. The God of the philosophers. So the God of philosophers can be described with all these polysyllabic words. Omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient. Okay, the words, when you see the words on paper, the meaning is pretty clear. And then without a body. Trying to find a fancy word for that, but how do you say, acorporeal? Is that a word? Incorporeal, yes, incorporeal. Right, good. Incorporeal, without a body. That's what the philosophers say. Classic example in Judaism, philosopher, of course, is Maimonides, right? 12th century philosopher active in Egypt. I think we mentioned Maimonides a couple of times already. So this is the God of, we might say, of educated Jews and Christians for the last couple millennia, is this God, or this conception of God. God omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, incorporeal. Philosophers then immediately have a problem if you define God in these abstract ways. Inevitably this is abstract, especially if God does not have a body. It is very hard for any of us humans to conceive of this God. I mean, draw a mental picture of something which doesn't have a body. You'll have a problem. So, philosophers, of course, have this abstract God, and the philosophers now have the problem, how does this abstract God relate to the world? How do you pray to such a God? How do you cozy up to such a God? Right? How do you establish spiritual intimacy with such a God? Answer, very difficult. But that's the philosophers. I want to ask, in this book, the Hebrew Bible, in general, or the Torah in particular, is that the God that we find? And the answer is, in short, the answer is no. And here I put in italics on my handout, just to be absolutely sure that you don't miss it. Not clear whether this conception of God can be found anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. And I would say, I would probably leave out the qualifier. I don't think you can find that conception of God anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible was not written by philosophers. Or maybe they passed for philosophers in their own time and place, but in retrospect, we would not call their conceptions of God philosophical. What do you have instead? As we've already seen in the narratives, especially in the book of Genesis, especially in the book of Exodus, in these narratives, God is anthropomorphic, meaning God has the shape, a morph, right? God has the shape of human. God is anthropopathic. God has the pathe of humans, passions, the emotions of humans. And God apparently has a body. Outstretched arm, God walks, God talks. If God speaks, one assumes God has a mouth. God sees, God gets angry, God repents, changes his mind, God has mercy. These are human emotions, which are routinely ascribed to God. And then, of course, you might have a simple case where Abraham is sitting in his tent one day and lifts up his eyes and he sees God standing there. Needless to say, these conceptions will bother later philosophers a great deal, both Jews and Christians alike. How philosophically unrespectable these passages are, how simplistic, naive, ill-tutored, uneducated they appear to be. Because we know, quote unquote, that God really isn't like that. However, if you read these passages straight, well, God is like that. Especially in the stories of Genesis and Exodus, especially in the hands of the narrator we call Jay. So Kugel talks about this in the chapter in the book, and he calls this the God of old. The God of old. This old-time conceptions of God, in which God is very much a human being with human emotions, human limbs, etc., right? In which God is depicted in this very anthropomorphic manner. This is the God of old. And he connects it with angels, and there I confess Kugel confuses me a great deal, where he says that in this conception of God, when you see God, God appears to you. Another way to say that God appears to you is to say you saw an angel. Now, once you mention angels, now we're really in the thick of it, because it gets very, very messy very quickly. So angels certainly can be a manifestation of the God of old, namely the God who manifests himself walking down the street. So you lift up your eyes and you see an angel. In other words, another way of saying you saw God. But insofar as God is manifest and visible, we call that an angel. How an angel relates to God, if you read the narratives very carefully, is extraordinarily confusing. And my two favorite examples are Genesis chapter 18 and Genesis chapter 32, where the narrator seems to jump back and forth. Is Abraham talking to God, or is Abraham talking to an angel? Did Abraham see God, or did Abraham see an angel? I don't know, but the passage is jumping around and I can't tell. It's quite hard to figure out. So for Kugel, the angel passages are evidence of the God of old, the anthropomorphic God who communicates directly in an unintermediated way with humans. However, later philosopher types looked on the references to angels, and they saw that as evidence not for the God of old, but what I would call the God of new. Namely, you can't see God, because God is precisely not anthropomorphic. God does not have a body, as we philosophers have been saying all along. So when you think you see God, what are you actually seeing? Answer, you're seeing some kind of mysterious intermediary by which God makes himself manifest to you. And we're going to call that an angel. We can call that other things too. We can call that Christ. if we're Christians. We can call that logos if we're philosophically minded Jews as well as Christians. We can call it all kinds of things. But these intermediary beings are there precisely because we believe in God as a non-anthropomorphic, incorporeal being. That's why we need angels there to intermediate. So I'm very confused reading Kugel whether the angels are evidence of the God of old or the angels are evidence of the God of new. Where are we in this process? And I respectfully would say this is not one of Kugel's more successful conceptions, in my opinion, unless I misconstrued and misunderstood his whole point, in which case I apologize to him, and then someone please enlighten me on what he is saying. If you're interested in this, I have a very nice session on this in my next term in CB23, and the argument between Justin Martyr and the Jew, right, trying to understand Genesis 18. Genesis 18 is a stunning chapter, right? Abraham is sitting by his tent. Sorry, the Lord appears to Abraham, verse 1. Verse 2, Abraham lifts his eyes and sees 3 men. Okay, go to work. Explain that. Yeah. Right. And then we discover these 3 men are really angels, but they're also the Lord. Yeah, so this provides an occasion for the Jew and the Christian to argue how to interpret this. And of course, for Justin, when it says Lord, it means Christ. Because no one lifts up his eyes and sees God. God's incorporeal. God does not manifest himself that way. That's for Greek mythology. That's not really what God is. Anyway, it's a wonderful, wonderful passage. The Torah's unphilosophical conception of God, you can see also in a point which I raised very briefly last week, which is when we try to talk about who or what is in the temple, or who or what is in this tabernacle, that portable tent shrine the Israelites have in the wilderness. So, class, is God to be found in the temple? Is God to be found in the tabernacle? Well, if you're a philosopher, of course, you know the answer is, of course not. That's stupid. You think this omnipotent, omniscient, universal God can be somehow put into a box? That makes no sense. However, if you're one of the writers of the Torah, apparently the answer is, yeah. God is somehow in the temple. There are different sources, have different conceptions at this point, whether it's God himself, this is the house of the Lord, God, or the divine throne, the divine footstool. We've already seen those conceptions in connection with P. And how do we know that God is really there, quote unquote? Because there's a pillar of smoke and or a pillar of fire. So when I see that, I know, quote, God is there. And when the pillar of cloud or smoke rises up and moves, then I know it's time to move on. That's P. Now I'm thoroughly confused by this because P is also the same guy who gives us Genesis chapter 1, which is the most cosmic God of all. I mean, you can't get more cosmic than the God of Genesis chapter 1, who creates the cosmos. And apparently is all alone doing so. Well, at least until you get to verse 26 and he creates humans, then we have this mysterious plural. But okay, at least until then, he's all by himself. And yet P is the same guy who also seems to tell that God is represented by a pillar of cloud or a pillar of smoke and moves into the tabernacle. And that's how we know God is there, and Moses can't enter when the cloud is there, because God is there. Which seems a very, dare I say it, naive conception. Okay, but we have an interesting problem here. When we get to Deuteronomy, it gets even more interesting, because Deuteronomy routinely uses the phrase, the place where God has chosen his name to dwell. So it's not God in the temple, shrine, it's God's name in the temple or shrine. Now, was Deuteronomy already getting a little bit more sophisticated? Deuteronomy is getting worried about this problem. How can I contain a universal God in a small building? So my answer is no, it's not God, it's God's name. God himself is too big to be put into a building. Is that how I should read it? That's how later Jews read it, to be sure. Whether that's what Deuteronomy really had in mind, I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, I've got to move on because I've got to the last big point. I can't run out of time. In short, I would simply say all of this is evidence that the people who wrote the Torah were not Aristotelian philosophers. When they conceived of God, they did not conceive of God as idea, capital I, or as mind, capital M, or as prime mover, capital P, capital M. All those philosophical, or the mind of the universe, the soul of the universe, right? All those philosophical conceptions are wonderful, right? But they clearly are not the conceptions of God that animate this text. And this will bother later Jews and Christians who will have to go back and clean up the Torah. It's all metaphor, it's all symbol, it's all God, the Torah speaking normal language for the benefit of the ill-educated. But we know it's not really so. Okay. Last big point. Is the God of the Torah a God of vengeance, God of war, God of anger? Question mark. Or to put the question in its true form, is the God of the Old Testament a God of vengeance as opposed to the God of the New Testament, who is a God of love? I'm sure you've heard this. Is this so? Most I need to say up front, this contrast, the God of the stern God of the Old Testament, I'm using now that language deliberately, the stern God of the Old Testament, the God of vengeance, war, strict, just, etc., versus the loving God of the New Testament, that contrast is ancient. It goes back at least to the 2nd century CE with a Christian heretic named Marcion, whom I'll talk more about next term in my CB 23 class. Marcion, M-A-R-C-I-O-N, Marcion, right? Who said precisely that the God of the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, is not the Christian God. Because we worship the God of the New Testament, that's the God of love, a good God. Whereas the God of the Hebrew Bible is a bad God. He's mean. He's not nice. That's not the God we worship. We have two separate gods. That's Marcion. Later Christians said, that's heretical. You cannot believe that and still be a good Christian. It's the same God. It's all one and the same God. All right, but interesting to observe in Christian popular culture and popular perception of the Bible, I have to say Marcion, I would observe, has won. Because everybody knows that the God of the Hebrew Bible is this strict, stern God of vengeance and war, and the God of the New Testament is the God of love. So is this so? So I don't have time to talk about the New Testament God right now. That's not my job. I hope to do that in my biblical literacy class next year if it's approved by the powers that be. Anyway, I would simply observe, I gave you a bunch of passages on the handout. If you read those passages, I would challenge you to read any of them and think that this God is a God of love, or alone. The God of love stuff comes out of 1 Corinthians. It comes out of a passage in Paul, who does indeed in that chapter conceive of God as love, capital L. However, the picture as a whole is far more complicated, as you would imagine in any large religious text. Similarly, my point here also is the God of the Hebrew Bible, which is my concern here, right? It's a complicated legacy. It can't be reduced to such simplistic summaries in spite of what you've been told. But I need to admit up front, the God of the Hebrew Bible gets a bad press. There's a lot of stuff in there which needs explaining. He punishes humanity with death as a response to the sin of the Garden of Eden. At least that's how Christians understand the story. He destroys the world in the flood. He destroys Sodom and Gomorrah because they're sinful. He kills all the Egyptian firstborns. He threatens to destroy the Israelites in the wilderness. Then we have this lex talionis, the law of vengeance. Then we have this God is warrior in Exodus 15. So we've got some tough press. I admit it. Don't deny it. But at the end of the day, is that the whole picture? Of course, the answer is no, and it can't be. Right? The Hebrew Bible in general and the Torah in particular are rich and variegated documents. They're going to have numerous different conceptions at work, and no doubt these, you have on the one side the strict, stern judge on the one side, to be sure, but on the other side you've got other images as well. I don't have time to deal with all of this issue. I was going to simply observe that many of these cases we are imposing our own cultural norms on the Hebrew text. And this was most clearly, I was going to talk about visiting the sins of the parents on the children. Visiting the sins of the parents on the children. This is a motif in a number of passages. Visiting the sins of the parents on the children. So the children pay for the sins committed by the parents. Is that fair? And yet I would say from the point of view of the Torah at least some strata in the Torah, the answer is yes. Not only is it fair and right, it's mercy. It's not divine, it's not divine justice, it's divine mercy at work. Why is it mercy? I'll tell you why it's mercy. In brief, when you buy a house, do you want to pay $200,000 up front in cash, or do you want to take a 30-year mortgage? That's a no-brainer. You want to take a 30-year mortgage. 30 years from now, maybe your children are going to inherit your debt. No, we understand. It's better to pay off over 30 years than to pay up front. Nobody wants to pay it up front in one lump sum. Everybody wants it to spread out over time. Well, it's exactly the same thing. I did a sin. I owe God punishment. I don't want to pay it up front. I want to take it over 30 years. Your children are going to inherit it? That's all right. It'll work out. That's divine mercy. And for us to come along and to say, from our perspective, it's not mercy at all, it seems to us completely unfair. Okay, fine, you're entitled to your perspective. That's not the perspective of the text. The text is part of a conception at work of God as merciful. And in the lecture handout, I give you the main passages to look at to see that. So I'm just trying to observe two things. One is the record is actually quite variegated and complicated. And two, we need to interpret the text from within, from how the texts themselves present these points, and not simply come along and impose our values on the text. Okay, ran out of time there, but okay, have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy the beautiful New England weather, and look forward to seeing you on Monday when we'll talk about Joshua and the conquest of Canaan. Thank you all.
Sure. Okay. So are there any thoughts or questions?
I find it most interesting, the very last part is talking about God being a merciful God in the Jewish, versus a Christian. Now, my beloved Nathan was Jewish. He felt his God was a God that punished. And I said, well, my God is very loving. Yet Mary, in one of her sessions, if I understood her correctly, felt that God was also loving in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel it's conflicting, all the things that happened to the Jews as written in the Old Testament. So I don't know what to believe at this point. Although as a parent, I know that we have disciplined our children, but hopefully it wasn't out of any bad vibes, but because we loved them and we wanted to steer them on the right road and a healthy road in life. I just don't quite know if God was a punishing God in the Old Testament or a loving God at that point. I'm
You
a
get-
little lost.
Well, in the notes, and he cites, he didn't mention in the lecture, but one of the things he mentions is that, for instance, when Jesus cites the greatest commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And the second is like unto this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Those are actually direct quotes, the first from Deuteronomy and the second from Leviticus.
Mm,
So that the core of, if you talk about God being love thing, the core of that is present in the Hebrew Bible. One of the things that I heard once was that the Torah begins and ends with an act of love on the part of God, because at the beginning, after Adam and Eve sinned and become aware of their nakedness, at least the way some people read the text, God made clothes for them.
ah,
And then at the end of the Torah in Deuteronomy, God buries Moses.
Mhm.
ah,
So,
yeah.
so
Oh,
they go ahead.
yes, yeah, he didn't enter into Egypt. He died before.
Right,
And
didn't,
God
yeah,
buried
right, that's
him.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, God buried him, and then that's when they, no one knows where he's buried to this day. That whole thing.
Right, right.
Um,
Well, that certainly would be a loving God.
Well, we talked about this before, and maybe I'm putting two things together that shouldn't be, that to limit any kind of punishment to one generation was a step forward, because it used to be before that those laws were articulated, that it was endless war forever. Your children, your grandchildren, for forever and ever. And so the whole point was, okay, the children are responsible for the parents are responsible for the children, but that's it, end it.
Yeah.
One
yeah,
generation.
you're right.
So, I mean, it seems not merciful now, but it was worse. And the other thing is that Christ was a very good Jew, and he knew his Torah,
Mhm.
spoke of it. So to separate the two is wrong.
Mhm.
If you're going to be a good Christian, you're going to have to be. That's why we're taking this class.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and that's why I think this is important, because I think to have this background, then you understand, you have some concept of the understanding of the context in which Jesus was speaking.
Yeah,
So,
he was raised Jewish and was speaking to Jews for the most part, and some Greeks.
Yeah.
But
And for instance, when he said, you love the Lord your God, in fact, he had to quote it back to him. This wasn't anything anybody around him was said, oh, wow, I never heard that before. That's really.
he's reminding them of their heritage, actually, what they're all supposed
Yeah, I
to
think that's
know anyway.
I think that's a fair statement.
It was
And there's
a good
something-
session tonight. I think. So-
There's
It
something
was-
very loving about the anthropomorphic view of God. As he said, you can't cozy up to a supreme being, but when you see God's love being manifested through the imagery of human emotion and so forth. When I was the Catholic Catechism, when I was in first grade, first question was, who is God? God is the supreme being who made all things and keeps them in existence. This is a first grader hearing who God is. And so all those abstract ways that, that we have learned to conceive of God, hopefully we're being cured of it. And when you
Is that
think
based
of
on, is that based on the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, Carol?
yeah, really, believing God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth.
Heaven and earth, yeah.
But
Apostles' Creed.
but the word Father, the term, once you call God Father, you're they're in a whole new realm. And I don't know if Jesus is the first one to call God Father, but and they say the translation of the word that Jesus used for father was really daddy. So he had a very intimate relationship with God, and he was teaching his apostles to, I hope, to view God in that same light.
I think, and maybe that, and that's really, again, anthropomorphic, like you said. And I think maybe the philosophic God that he talks about, omnipresent, omniscient, and all the rest. The thing is that took root, then you also see the rise of, sort of the belief in saints and the devotion to Mary, because you need something that you can relate to if you can't relate to God.
Good point. Good point.
And so I think you need some, because God becomes so distant and so forbidding, and then you have Christ as the judge, and he gets distant. So, next best thing is, well, you got mom. So yeah. So he'll listen to his mother.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's always been my sense of what happened. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. That's my sense of what happened, is that as God got more distance philosophically, then people still look for an intermediary that they could relate to.
Yep.
I think is natural. I think that's yeah, it's right. Like you said, it's hard to cozy up to like some cloud. So okay.
The popularity of Star Wars: The Force seems to be coming round to this. I thought that was a nice way of popularizing something that is acorporal. I guess people aren't Star Wars fans here.
No, I'm just saying, I'm trying to relate then, where does Obi-Wan fit in there?
Oh, well, he's a prophet. There ever there was one.
Well, there was a guy named Joseph Campbell. He died years ago, but he talked about all of the sort of the religious, cultural undertones, the mythic underpinnings for Star Wars. In fact, he toward the end of his life, he was really tight with George Lucas. And
Yeah, there's quite a bit in the whole trilogy, or whatever, how many pieces of the story there are. There's a lot of mythology in there.
and again, mythology in the sense of not so much the mythology in the sense of stories that bind us together or create community.
Mhm.
For instance, the journey of the hero, where you have the hero that got, like Luke Skywalker, that goes off and to the wilderness for the testing,
Mhm.
with Yoda there, and the controlling and sort of not giving into his emotions and all this kind of business, and then so that's sort of the hero's journey that you see in a lot of other stories.
Yeah, he's plagiarizing off all kinds of things. He did it on purpose. I mean, the whole point, I not to talk for George Lucas, but my understanding is that he wanted to take these philosophical points and popularize them, really, make them hardcore in space, in future, this. So that people could see a future where this sort of philosophical theology was still important, even though you had robots and other planets and high-tech stuff.
I think that was one reason too for the popularity, because I think people connected, maybe if they didn't hear it or consciously, but they still connect with that story.
Yeah.
So when they see it, so I think, I think what he was doing, I don't know if he did this consciously, but I think one reason for the popularity was they connect with that story.
Yeah. Oh, I think he did it on purpose, very, very wisely.
Well, it's sold a lot of tickets.
Yeah, it sells tickets.
I mean, you see the same thing in Lord of the Rings and
Mhm.
all those other sort of mythic stories.
The Hobbit.
Hobbit. So,
C.S.
Okay.
Lewis was doing the same thing with lions and
well, and that one was explicitly religious. I mean, that was pretty clear. So, but it's still a good story.
Yeah.
Well, folks, I've got to say goodbye. Barclay's telling me she's got to go outside. So have a good evening.
Good night, Dale.
Yeah.
Night, Dale.
I-
So, anything else? Well, okay.
it's good.
So I will see you next week.
Good night,
Son,
everyone.
we'll enter the Holy Land,
Excellent.
crossing the River Jordan.
Gives us something to look forward to.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Mhm.